read that out.
Yeah.
If I could. A secondary purpose would be to offer comments on educational materials, consultation synopsis, and report recommendations, best based on the members' knowledge and expertise.
Thank you. I'm satisfied.
Councillor Haynes for the first time.
If I may, I do have a couple of questions, and I understand the creation of this group, as it was explained to me, was a one-time focus group on how to go forward and set up the governance review. But in your second item there, you have some follow-on actions that will be undertaken by the focus group. For example, maybe I'm misunderstanding it. A secondary purpose would be to offer comments on educational materials, consultation synopsis, and report recommendation. Is that from the focus group or from the lead group that was being created?
That's, Mr. Mayor, that's it's the discussion included those terms of reference, not line by line, but that terms of reference was in the draft agenda of the meeting on September the 10th. So what you see here is not related to that focus group. As Mr. Laidlaw has said, that was a one-time event. It wasn't a committee, it was a group. And so this is really meant to be the terms of reference for what will become the Governance Review Citizens Advisory Committee.
So,
understanding that, thank you. Then, is the concept, building on, if I may, from what my colleague Councillor Bryce said, about the arm's length distance from council, which was clearly stated at the start, and this report is suggesting the arms are shortened back to council, that the selection of the members of this committee, having listened to the audience, there's concern about expertise and amount of time available to serve and knowledge of process. I'm thinking that that could be addressed in how the advertisement is created to open the door to a self-selecting set of resumes. The selection of those resumes, would that go to, if I may, a second convening of the same focus group, to the consultant body, which is you and your colleague, or to council? I'm not quite clear on that, and I think there's a need for clarity.
So, Mr. Mayor, that could happen a number of ways, and I appreciate the comment of having further arm's length. There was, with this group, a focus group. We asked them for one evening, their participation. They were randomly selected from your existing committees. You could certainly ask that or any other additional group to be involved in selecting resumes and appointing them for the purpose of this report. As governance committee, the recommendations coming from myself is to be advertised through the legislative process and 11 people selected by council. However, council could choose to create another group to select those applicants, to advertise. There are a number of ways of doing it. I've just presented one option here, but there are certainly others should council wish not to undertake that action through the normal process of selecting applicants for committees.
So I have another item to hold here. If a second focus group was created, maybe drawn in the same way, and I thought it was a nimble way to get a first capture of a focus group, people that would volunteer to be on that focus group, perhaps in the same way as before, from the advisory committees, they would automatically be self-disqualifying themselves from being on the governance review. And a couple of people called me when this process was underway and said, hey, Councillor Haynes, I really want to be in the governance review. And my comment back to them, based on my understanding at the time, was that the members of the focus group that would be selecting the governance review group from whatever process went forward, review of resumes, etc., is not the place to be. You don't want to be on that focus group if you are wishing and contending to put your hat into the ring to be on the governance review. Is that correct?
Yes. And as I say, council could choose a number of methods to do this, notwithstanding whatever method you choose at this point. There is going to be criticism about how that is done. This is obviously a very important issue and people want to be involved in this. It's the recommendation for myself that on selection, these people be recommended and selected by council, as ultimately that report will come to you. If, as an alternative, you wish to ask another group, whether the existing group that was formed quite randomly, another group that you might create, all of that is an option. So that would address ultimately the council if you wish to choose another direction other than the one recommended in the report here.
So I have one more, if I may. So as we go ahead and look at the governance review, some of my colleagues, I think, are going to talk on numbers of membership in that committee. I'd like to talk to the substance of action of those members and the knowledge base in those members, because they will not all equally be knowledgeable, but hopefully they'll all equally be sharp and bring that to the table. However, when you look at the range of activities, how the district is governed internally, what is the district's relationship with its sister municipalities and the CRD, and should this be changed and to achieve more cost savings, and I'll come up to the top. The role and powers of local government, municipalities, regional district, how the district interacts with and communicates with residents and sanitary space. This is such a broad range of activities to cover, and in the time that we're already recognizing will be limited. Is there a mechanism considered, or can it be considered, to task the committee into subgroups, to say, okay, the subgroup would look at this and bring it back to the main group? So I'm just struggling to think that body of information, to get through it in time to bring forward a report, is a daunting amount of work. And I'm not sure that the structure you're describing is effective as it could be.
Mr. Mayor, and that's quite possible, and as I said, this could be more specific, it could be less specific. The idea here is to task and recommend that council appoint 11 people. They are given considerable broad latitude in this report to define which issues they want to review in terms of governance. We expect a lot of those issues to come from the public. We expect a lot of public consultation that they will go through, and that this to be a fairly lengthy process. So all of that's possible. We did not want at this point to try and be too prescriptive with respect to the specific issues that group might take on, but to let that group determine, to listen to the public and see which issues would come and emerge that they wish to investigate first, review, and bring back and report incrementally to council. And one comment?
Yes, just thank you, Mr. Laidlaw. Just to make mention that under 1.2.2, where we would refer to roles of the advisory committee, the very first item is considered to be topics for governance review, and the role would be to provide input on the topics to be included in the governance review. So very much that was seen as being the 4 items that we have in there, very broad ones, and they could be further redefined by the group, and it's up to the group to, I think, to decide whether or not they want to see a subcommittee type of process.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, so there is that flexibility there, and I told a bit, I'm sorry.
I did have one more question, and it's the role of the consultant. As I read this, and as I listen to our residents in the room here, I think there is a interest in identifying what is the role of the consultant. And the way I understood it, and the way I've had discussions, is that the consultant's activities would be to support the report writing, keep the notes, and facilitate it, such that the committee members can do the decision making and review, and then hand over information in packages that the consultant would then prepare for communication purposes and things like that. But that the consultant themselves would not be guiding the review. Am I accurate in that?
Yeah, I think that, as Ms. Allen has indicated earlier, one of the things that came back from the group, and they're quite unanimous, is to expect this group to move forward and manage this process. It's just too much for volunteers. So the idea is to create a structure which would maximize the use of volunteers, maximize their ability to work with the community. So what's anticipated here, and I refer to it in terms of coming back with the budget, is once the committee is established by council, it would be up to that committee to select the consultant. The consultant is not being determined yet. The members would select their own committee, and they will determine to some degree what is an appropriate balance between the work they can do as a volunteer, the subjects that they can take on, and the work and support they wish to have from a consultant.
That's very good.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Dermott.
Thank you, Mayor, Mr. Mayor. I just want to comment on some of the things I think we're crafting with here. We have created a situation that is extremely difficult to resolve properly because we are looking to structure a committee that is representative of the citizens of Saanich. If you're dealing with a large business corporation or a government corporation, that's not all that difficult a task. You can go for department heads, deputy ministers, members of leaders of the union, and perhaps one or two members at large in that manner. Because there's a structure there you can take advantage of. If you're dealing with Saanich, the only real structure you have without being vetted by the citizens as a whole are council. Because council have to go into an election and get elected. And they, unfortunately, it wasn't all the citizens. We don't get as much participation as we would like, but it's as close as we get. The problem we're having is that the citizens are a largely unorganized mass. And it's very difficult to say, if you go to pick somebody, that they represent the citizens at large. The community associations do to a certain degree, to a lesser degree probably than Saanich does. Beyond that, there may be some active groups that you could consider. But if you, no matter what somebody writes, if you pick just a citizen from their own resume and their intent to serve, you have no idea whether they are going to be representing their own point of view or that of a larger group of citizens. That's going to be a very difficult thing to start with. So the really important thing that this process is going to need to do is to hold a lot of events or create a lot of venues where any citizen can input information, whether it be town halls, surveys, open houses, whatever it might be. But then there has to be a process of vetting that information to ultimately get recommendations at some point in front of council. Again, having one single committee of 11 people runs the risk of being not as representative as you would like. You might be better to have that committee and to have it also refer materials to organizations such as SCAN, the Saanich Community Association Network, and any others that you feel have a validity to represent Saanich broadly. The process, as I've just outlined it to a certain degree, is going to be quite a large and difficult one. I think it would be unusual to expect a volunteer citizen group to either have the expertise or the time to run that kind of process. So while we want to maximize citizen involvement and representation, absolutely, we also want to make sure that they have the resources necessary to carry out what they're going to do. And that, I think, automatically has to involve a consultant in some manner they help. And the last thing is, with a committee of only 11, and we would do our best to make sure, whoever chooses them has to do their best to make sure they represent citizens at large. You run the risk of having 4 or 5 people with an agenda take over the process. And that causes the process to lose all credibility. So somehow the information that comes to council eventually can't be from a committee of 11 people. It has to be from the citizens of Saanich broadly. And we have to structure something that allows that to take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dermott. I'd like to make some remarks on my own, but before I do, I think we could use a motion on the floor. Given the recommendation of the report, why don't we divide the motion into receive it for information and then we'll deal with the discussion that we had. All right. Thank you for that. So, I made a couple notes. My voice isn't very good, so I have a cold, but I've got no spare with me. We're now about month 10 of this new council, and this effort started out in December 8th at a council meeting where a motion was put forward by Councillor Dermott, seconded by Councillor Ballard, that a governance review in accordance with the motion on the ballot be initiated as soon as possible within a 9-day period. Unfortunately, that wasn't able to happen because there was a time when we were understaffed at the top of our management, And once we were able to fill that role, I feel we were able to get going on that. So I think I'd like to just apologize for that, because we often have the intention of moving things ahead, but we aren't always able to do that. One of the problems that I have with this report, aside from the fact that I wasn't aware of it on Thursday when I had the agenda setting meeting, and it came to my attention a little bit afterwards, is that I had the intention in the inaugural meeting, and I won't belabor this too much, but to establish a standing committee in order to handle this. This committee was undefined, but it was an idea to put forward in order to go about the process. Before that committee could even have any kind of discussion or be established, the motion came forward to council to set staff upon an action. And I think it's important to understand some of the nuances of how government and how council works. When the body of council as a whole makes a decision, then the staff take that, and under the community charter, it's the responsibility of the mayor to then provide general direction to staff on that motion in order to get the activity to happen. So we have the circle on the left where the council is, and then on the right we've got the triangle where the administration is. So the council is deciding the what, and the administration is deciding the how, and then we report back in the cycle. So one of the problems I have with the report is that in July, I believe it was July, I established a standing committee in order to try to implement my initiative from the inaugural speech. But I don't read anywhere in the report that that standing committee has been mentioned, or it's been acknowledged, or it's been shared with the focus group. So my question for Ms. Allen is, were you aware that this committee existed, and did you bring it up with the focus group?
Mr. Mayor, yes, we were aware that a committee had been established. I wasn't entirely certain what its terms of reference are, or who was to be on that committee. But yes, we did raise it with the focus group. We mentioned that this was occurring. We also mentioned that there's additional work being done by the provincial government on this matter.
So my second question is, was the focus group given like a choice or an option? How were they, in lack of a term of reference, which doesn't quite exist in this report either, how was the focus group given a choice or given any information? I certainly wasn't contacted.
Excuse me, sorry.
Yeah.
Apologies. Mr. Mayor, the terms of reference, the draft terms of reference were in the agenda of the focus group, and they are here revised according to some of the comments that were made at the focus group.
Right, okay. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get out of this morass that we've found ourselves in. We've got two competing processes. I certainly don't want to fight council tooth and nail on this. I certainly haven't brought the committee up to speed in the timeline that I would have liked to, but it was my intention to strike the committee and to put a member of council and a member of the public on the committee. And I put Rob Wixon from the George Tolkien Community Association on that committee to then develop the terms of reference. That terms of reference has been shared with SCAN, and where we left it was that SCAN would be holding a workshop in order to evaluate that and then report back to the committee to give it some advice. One of the problems that I'm hearing with the report that we have right now, and the comments that come from Mr. Schmuck and Mr. Lakey, Ms. Harper, Trenya, and Ms. Whitworth, is not just the scope of what's being proposed, but as we heard on council tonight, is the membership as well. There are about 16 community associations in Sandwich, and as such, they have a stake in how we run ourselves and how they interact with us. They're, in my opinion, I think they're the primary stakeholders in this. But when I hear that there's only 2 spots on 11 for, potentially, for community associations, and then we're dealing with other organizations that I think we can learn from, that don't actually have a vote. They're going to be sitting on this committee, they're going to be making recommendations, they'll come back to council, but ultimately, if we get to a ballot question in the future, these organizations that sat on this committee aren't going to be able to actually vote themselves. It's going to be pushed out to the broader community. So it's my hope that we can get somewhere on this, because the motion at the beginning was to have a citizen-led process, and I'm not reading that in the report. It's very, very difficult to have a citizen-led process where there's been a non-transparent focus group, and we heard that tonight from the speakers. They're not aware of what happened at that meeting. I, as the mayor, establishing a standing committee, I'm not aware of what happened at that meeting community associations. And I also have an issue with the advisory committee members being used as part of the selection process, because I know that members of the community associations dearly and desperately want to be part of this process and to see it move along and be part of that. So I am, I'm not going to make any motions or make any recommendations, but I'm just wondering how we can bring these two things together, because it was my understanding that when the initial report from City Spaces came back in June, there would be an opportunity to move these two things together. We have statements in the minutes that this will be possible. I've had assurances that it will be possible. I've tried my best to provide direction to staff in order to stitch this together. But as yet, I have been unable to, in my capacity, to stitch it together. And I don't know how to do that. Councilor Bress.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't recall the same commitments about leaving the two committees together, and I leave that to your memory. Because the rather have a motion on the floor which is to receive, but obviously we're going to have sort of a general discussion here. I want to move forward. I think there is the basis here of something very exciting to go ahead with. And sure, we will chug along and stumble along and sometimes move along, because this is something other communities have not done. This is not something you go to the shelf and pull it off. So I think that coming together, goodwill, and making efforts here to bring together this report, the revised report which has come tonight, with the assistance of the focus group, I think, while the motion here is just to receive, I would certainly be anxious, once this motion to receive is dealt with, to move to a substantive motion, basically with, I guess, any modifications that are suggested that go with the recommendation that is before us.
Thank you. Councilor Worthen, and then Haynes, and then...
Thank you very much. Remind me of sewage treatment, trying to arrive at consensus there. And it's interesting, the process, and I agree the process is important, but it's almost becoming, we're allowing it to become more complicated than the governance review almost. And I believe there will be concerns, no matter which way we go, on how it's done. And that's just human nature. Coming back to the names, when we first started this, and I agree with myself, and I think council agreed that it would be arm's length from council. That sounds good. The elected body, stay right out of it. But in reality, I'm not sure if it's always good, listening to Councilor Dermott too, what he shared. And I guess coming back to the committee, myself, I would have no problem in a committee that's in place, selecting 15 to 20 names, bringing those names to council, in council, looking at them and considering them. I think as we get into this, coming back to the election, there were a lot of people that wanted a vote, wanted to say. Well, they wanted to say, I believe, at that time, and on a specific issue, and that's just my feeling. I believe as we get into this, the number of people coming out, if I was a betting person, I would say it might be a little more than what we have in this room. I'm not sure we're going to gather the whole community together in a big way. And I believe as we go down the road, I believe we'll have to make changes, we'll have to make adjustments. And coming back to what we're talking about here tonight, is it perfect? No. But as we move down the road, we will adjust to it with the input from the community and you people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Haynes.
So this is a very good, interesting discussion. I reflect on a few things. The way I envision this going forward is once the committee is formed, whatever shape it takes and how many people are on it, the fact that there are 16 community associations, and we could have them all on and all the other citizens on there to have a broadly represented group. But that does not mean that the process decided on by the committee, which would have community association members on would not be able to say that as they get each part of the work done, it's not sent out to a broader community for input. They could send sections of the reports out to all the community associations. They could send sections of the report out to all the friends of groups, and there's considerable numbers of them. They could send sections of the reports out to seniors groups. They could send sections of the report out to legislature groups where they could identify around other municipalities. What do you think of this idea of how we might alter how we integrate our services? So the review committee is not the entire scope of the resources available for community input. So I saw that as something going forward, and I had a conversation with some community associations on that point. We're on two kinds of continuums. The mayor has suggested a standing committee of 2 people, 1 resident and 1 council member. This committee suggestion is a much broader one. We're trying to find the balance. Secondly, whatever comes back from this process has to be digestible to council. We are the elected people of the people of Saanich, the elected council of the people of Saanich, that will need to implement the results of this process. And I think this is in part what Councillor Derman may be indicating, that, and Councillor Workland, is that we have to have confidence at the very beginning that it's going in the right direction, such that it will bring back things that we are confident represent the feelings and thoughts and desires of the people of Saanich. And that it's not in some way, we could say, taken over by a group that is vehemently for amalgamation, vehemently for changing our police force structures. We need a balance in the process, such that we can bring a balanced understanding of the results. So that's how I read this, and this is how I vote to accept this report. And I look forward now to the ideas that Councillor Bryce has mentioned, where we might play now a little bit in this space of how will this roll forward in a way that will bring back results that are justifiable to the people of Saanich and deliverable in their adjudication by council.
Thank you, Councillor. Let me just address some of the points that you raised, because there are a few mistakes that in there. The committee that was established actually has 3 members. I'm on it, Rob Wixon is on it, member of the Correspondent Community Association, and I appointed Councillor Plant on there to work with. Excuse me, I'm speaking, please. Okay. The way that all select and standing committees of council work is that they do delegated work under council, and they simply make recommendations to council. They really can't initiate a lot on their own, especially if they don't have a budget. And this committee has never been offered a budget. So anything that the committee comes up with can come in the form of a report and can come to council, and council can deliberate on it, and council can weigh the pros and cons. And if the council in the end decides not to select what the committee's recommended, it can do away with it, and it can make its own recommendations, and it can send something back to the committee, and we all can do this back and forth. So when we're talking about the possibility of a committee being staffed with pro-amalgamation people or police amalgamation people, if that were the case, these recommendations would simply be coming back to council, for council to look at. It simply can't run away with it. So what I find offensive is that there's this idea that if the committee is given an opportunity to function, it might run away and run out of council's control. And that's not the case. This is the council. Council is in total control. And I don't think, I think it speaks a little bit too much to fear than it does to the openness and the possibilities that might exist. Councillor Derman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The basic structure in here suggested that I think I can agree with. The question is one, of course, how you're going to constitute a committee and what processes this thing going to carry out. I understand the mayor's intent in establishing a standing committee, but the weakness, of course, of standing committees is that under provincial legislation, you can't have more citizens on them than you do have council members. And so in this case, we have a committee of 3 people. I'm not sure that's adequate for defining the terms of reference, which we were hoping would be defined quite broadly by a larger citizen group. We got a focus group from the advisory committees. Perhaps there could have been reference to SCAN or something like that as well, but the more reference you do, the longer the process. It is the intent to have the process as much as possible conducted by citizens. That's my intent, and I suspect that's the intent of council. Those citizens, we are hoping, represent as broadly as possible the broader citizenry of Saanich. The difficulty we're having is exactly how we're going to determine that is the case. If you get a focus group to appoint the members, then you're left with a concern of do they truly represent a broad view of Saanich or do they not? We might be in a situation where we have nobody other than council to do the appointment. Beyond that, we want to set up the process in a way that it is perceived to have legitimacy, not just by council, but also by the broader citizens of Saanich. And that's where we have to create the venues for every group to come forward, and every citizen, whether it be somebody in favor of amalgamation, somebody not in favor of amalgamation, whatever it is, and give their input. But it must be structured in a manner that is clearly open to all, and it cannot be seen, because it is possible that a process can be subverted and taken over by a particular interest group, and we certainly want to avoid that. So I will, when the question to receive comes up, I will certainly support it. And then from there, it's going to be an interesting discussion.